This episode of New Politics was released on the 3rd of September, 2022, and produced on the land of the Wongal and Whadjuk people.
Welcome to New Politics. In this episode, a royal commission into the failed Robodebt scheme, the first 100 days of the new Labor government, how are they travelling so far, and the politics behind the Jobs and Skills Summit in Canberra. I'm Eddie Djokovic, editor of New Politics.
I'm David Lewis. Today I'll be playing McCafferty from Andrew Lloyd Webber's musical Cats.
And if you'd like to support New Politics, you can support us through a Patreon subscription. But whether it's a subscription or if you just want to listen in, read our material online or buy a t-shirt or buy a book, it's all available at newpolitics.com.au, and all of this is a good way to support independent journalism. The federal government has announced the Royal Commission into the Robodebt scheme, which sent out 470,000 wrongly issued debt notices and claimed $721 million from repayments from people who didn't actually owe a debt to the government in the first place. All up, the scheme cost the government $1.8 billion in repayments and settlement costs. Over 2,000 people committed suicide in relation to the stress and anxiety caused by the Robodebt system. It was found to be illegal, and it was one of the biggest failures of government since Federation. Generally, when these types of government mistakes occur, we need to find out how it happened and why it happened, and to make sure that it never happens again. And whichever side of politics you follow, this seems to be a good idea. If the system ended up causing so much human misery, of course you wouldn't want that to happen again, but there's already been a negative reaction from Conservatives. The opposition leader, Peter Dutton, has called the Royal Commission a witch hunt and suggested it's all about the Prime Minister wanting to get even. But is this about getting even, or is it an essential inquiry into one of the worst examples of public administration in Australian history?
I guess the first question is, what does the Prime Minister want to get even with? He won the election rather comprehensively when you factor in the independents that got in. And as seasoned a political operative as Mr. Albanese is, he tends not to hold grudges once they've been dealt with. And I would have thought the thrashing that the Liberal Party received would have been enough for Mr. Albanese, and that he should now go on and govern. Peter Dutton's very worried because nearly every senior Liberal government member at the time was knee-deep in this scandal, and it was an absolute scandal. The suicides, the mental health concerns, the shame and humiliation were just way too much for any government to bear for what turned out to be a flawed process. Just awful. And Peter Dutton, I think, needs to be very, very careful in what he says. I don't think it's going to end well for him from where I stand.
Well, governments have actually used some sort of income matching systems for some time to retrieve overpayments. They were actually first used in the 1970s and gradually became more sophisticated over time. 2001 was the first time that Centrelink had a direct link up to the Australian Taxation Office, and I think that there shouldn't really be an issue about having to pay money back that you've been overpaid for, or if someone has defrauded the Commonwealth, or if someone has got something like 15 undeclared jobs or $1 million in a bank account. Well, they shouldn't actually be receiving social security benefits. That should go to the people that need it the most. And the federal government should have a right to reclaim monies on behalf of the taxpayer if the money has been fraudulently gained. But Robodebt was something that we've never actually seen before. It was like the government was actually defrauding people and demanding that they pay money back to the government, and for money that was never actually owed. They also offered incentives for debt collection agencies to aggressively collect these monies. One of the Liberal Party ministers at the time, Alan Tudge, he sent out the message that the government would hunt people down. Government operations shouldn't be like a version of the Hunger Games, but maybe these guys have got fantasies about these sorts of things, but it was a weird and bizarre system that should never have seen the light of day. It was a system that was thought up by Scott Morrison while he was Social Services Minister in 2015 and implemented by Christian Porter and Stuart Robert when They became social services ministers. And to me, there also seems to be a bit of a religious element to this as well. Morrison and Robert are Pentecostals, and it was like they were punishing the unworthy people, but it was an anti-human program and it was illegal, and government should never be involved with this type of action.
There's very, very little outright fraud in these types of benefits. It does exist, but it's almost statistically irrelevant. And certainly genuine and deliberate fraud should be punished. Mistakes do happen. You often have complex administration that has to be navigated by people without the experience or the education to be able to navigate it properly. And so mistakes do happen. But again, this type of rort is exceedingly rare. There's been a whole lot of talk about what's the difference between legal and illegal, etc. But if you've followed the guidelines, then there's not much people can do about it. This was a thing made to kick into the poor. This was a thing made to kick into the disadvantaged. This was a thing made for the power mad Scott Morrison, the power mad Christian Porter, the power mad Alan Tudge, mediocre men with nothing. No skills, no talent, no genius, no basic intelligence to show off how important they were. And these are the ones who should get charged and perhaps jailed and certainly stripped of their benefits.
Well, there's already been 2 Senate inquiries into Robodebt, and both of these inquiries were quite scathing of the scheme. They also pointed out that there was a deliberate downgrading of Centrelink services, and that made it more difficult for the public to access, or the people that needed to access Centrelink services, and people were asked for incorrect data, which of course meant that they ended up being caught with the Robodebt. The Prime Minister at the time, Scott Morrison, he did actually apologise for the program when it was finally closed down in May 2020. It was also condemned by the federal court when they approved the $1.8 billion settlement in June 2021. And the Liberal Party's defence in all of this, now that they're in opposition, is to make the claim that Labor actually created the Robodebt system. Well, no, they didn't. That's a complete lie. Labor did extend data matching protocols when they were last in government in 2011, and the intention at that stage was to recoup $71 million from genuine overpayments and fraud, and there was a high level of human oversight within their system. Labor's income matching system was nothing like the Robodebt. Robodebt tried to claw back 20 times the amount of revenue, $1.8 billion, although eventually they only recouped $721 million. And it was an automated system with no human oversight, and it was all determined by algorithm as well. So for me, it takes a special kind of devious politician to actually dream up of a system that causes so much human misery, and an even more devious one to claim that they weren't even responsible for setting it up in the first place.
Cowards, bullies, mediocrities. That's really the legacy of the last government. And I wish I could point to good things they did, or useful things they did, or even understandable things they did, like I can with every other government before. The Fraser government, the Howard government, the McMahon government, the Gorton government, the Holt government, the Menzies government. We can point to things they did okay, things they did well, things that added to the Australian quality of life, things that subtracted. That's what we should do. Nothing the last 9 years, except for same-sex marriage, which they were dragged kicking and screaming to and tried to destroy through a postal vote. So there you are, there's one thing. They did very little that enhanced or improved Australia. And what they did do, they were dragged kicking and screaming towards without ever thinking of anything but their own small petty morals, as Keith Richards sneered to the British court.
So the Labor Party and the Australian Greens, they've been calling for this Royal Commission since June 2020, and the Labor Party actually pledged to hold a commission if they did win the election. They won the election, so there's no surprises that this is all happening now. Royal Commissions, even the genuine ones, they always do have an element of political payback. They shouldn't, but they do. That's how politics operates. And we only have to look at the Royal Commission into trade unions and the insulation scheme to see how thoroughly the coalition trashed the concept of conventions, of holding a Royal Commission. But this is a necessary Royal Commission. It's headed by the former Queensland Chief Justice, Catherine Holmes. And the terms of reference to find out how the Robodebt scheme was established, who established it, why debt collections agencies were used and how they were used, the level of harm committed, and a way of ensuring that such a system is never implemented ever again. And of course, governments can't be above the law. But I did look up a similar situation recently. The Dutch government implemented a similar kind of system with their childcare benefit system, and they forced 26,000 people to pay back the financial support that they had received. And just like the Robodebt experience, many people experienced financial hardship and emotional stress, and that government resigned after a parliamentary inquiry found that they had acted illegally in that scheme. So the Dutch government resigned, but Robodebt was 20 times worse, and it seems that holding a royal commission into this isn't enough. The Morrison government is no longer in office. Christian Porter is now out of Parliament altogether, but there should be some consequences for those people that implemented the Robodebt system. And I don't know what those consequences should be. Now, there'd be cabinet confidentiality and some ministerial immunity from a government possibly behaving illegally and unlawfully. Catherine Holmes is due to report back to Parliament by April 2023, so we might get some answers by then, but just not all the answers that we're actually looking for.
The next response will be, there's too many royal commissions and we don't do enough. And it's the whole strategy to try and undermine the Royal Commission. Often they do have an element of payback. And I think always to the Royal Commission into the pink bats, which was meant to nail Peter Garrett to the wall, and yet found that Peter Garrett was actually one of the better ministers that we'd had in the last little while, and that his administration of it was undermined by dodgy contractors who'd employed the 4 people who were tragically killed, and the contractors hadn't followed regulations and had tried to cut corners, which turns out had nothing to do with the minister. So Royal Commissions should be, as you said, a very good way of finding things out, and sometimes are despite themselves. Peter Dutton is petrified. I think he knows that he's potentially in a lot of trouble and that his political career might be coming to an end.
You're listening to New Politics. You can subscribe to us on Apple or Google Podcasts, listen through Amazon Music, Spotify, YouTube and SoundCloud, or you can find us at newpolitics.com.au. And you can also support New Politics through Patreon.
Labor's been in office for 100 days, and it was marked with a National Press Club address by the Prime Minister Anthony Albanese. It was titled Building a Better Future, which is the same message that they used during the election campaign.
The great privilege, the great opportunity and the solemn responsibility of government is putting our ambition for the country into action, converting the promises of a campaign into the progress of a nation, writing our vision for Australia's future into the laws of the land. Our government is only 100 days into this journey, but we are resolved on the destination of a better future. We are focused on building a fair wage, strong growth, high productivity economy. An Australia where working hard means you can pay the bills, support your family, save for the future and achieve your aspirations. An Australia where everyone can trust in quality services, strong Medicare, affordable childcare, decent aged care and a national disability insurance scheme that fulfils its great promise. An Australia where investments in education and training and skills and housing and infrastructure and technology mean the doors of opportunity are open to everyone in every part of our great country. I recognise that we're facing challenging times right now. I know a lot of people are doing it really tough, but I'm optimistic about our country. I believe in the Australian people and I'm energised by the work of building a better future.
So it is a bit of an arbitrary number. It's not like anything special happens on day number 100, but the first 100 days of a government are very important. It's a key foundation for how they'll govern for the rest of the parliamentary term. In the address, Albanese acknowledged that these are challenging times, but he wants to change the way governments function and interact with the public. He suggested that there needs to be more reform to achieve renewal, and his priority will be investing in people and infrastructure. And at this stage, we can only see the blueprint for what Albanese wants this Labor government to achieve, and it's only through the passage of time that we'll be able to see if there's going to be any success there. We've already had the Jobs and Skills Summit, and then there's the budget to be released in October, so there's still a long way to go before we can make serious assessments for the Labor government. The former independent member for New England, Tony Windsor, he's given the new Labor government a mark of 8 out of 10. There's other people that have been a lot less generous than that, but the government has been travelling well since they were elected in May this year. But there's a long, hard road ahead, and we'll just have to wait and see if they're up to the challenge or not.
Government isn't an easy job. And of course, if you do it well, it becomes harder. There are all types of interests to balance. There are all kinds of choices that need to be made. Everything comes at a cost, and I don't mean just a monetary cost. I mean a political cost, a social cost, a cultural cost. And of course, you try and make the cost to your side less than it is to the cost to the people who may be opposed to you. But sometimes politically, it's better to let your side pay a bit more to win over some of the other side and things like that. So government is not easy, and decisions can cost lives, and even seemingly innocuous decisions. The idea of, do we send the highway this way or that way? You send it one way and you destroy a town's livelihood. You send it the other way and you destroy a national park. And there's no third way. It's a type of thing that weighs on ministers and prime ministers, etc. The government has been doing well, but there's some things that it could do better. And I'm sure that these are weighing on the cabinet and the prime minister. Now, added to that fact is that we now know that the last Prime Minister appointed himself to things that he shouldn't have. So that, I think, puts an extra onus to make sure that every decision they make is fully explained and fully thought through and fully transparent. This may make some of the deals that get made in politics a lot harder to make too, because they can't say, oh, well, we made a deal with X or Y, because that's harder to explain the transparency of it. Your supporters will always say, well, of course, that's how it works. It's the people in the middle you've got to worry about.
Well, as far as the change government is concerned, the Labor government is travelling well, and they've been out of office for 9 years, so there's always going to be teething issues there as well. But the good news is that there's no scandals yet, but I'd say that if you're having a scandal within the first 100 days of your new government, there's probably something seriously wrong going on. So no scandal yet, although the mainstream media is desperately trying to find one. News Corporation tried to fabricate a scandal of 3 ministers holding shares that they were meant to divest, according to Anthony Albanese's code of conduct. They are in the process of selling those shares and selling those in the correct way to avoid any conflict of interest. And in the case of Bill Shorten, his share value was $1,400, so there's not too much going on there. But new governments will always travel well for a certain period of time anyway. Kevin Rudd's problems when Labor was last in office didn't arise until Tony Abbott became opposition leader in 2009. And that was about 2 years after the Labor Party won office in 2007. And that was all focused around the issues relating to the emissions trading scheme and a super profits tax. They also had the ongoing negative reporting about the Building the Education Revolution scheme and managing the global financial crisis. Now, I don't actually think there were too many problems there, but a highly negative media and a manic opposition leader made sure that the problems were created even when problems didn't exist. But my point is that governments travel well within their first 100 days of office because they haven't actually done that much that can go wrong. And that's not actually a criticism. It's just that you can't do anything wrong if there's no big projects or events that can go wrong.
There's a lot of cleaning up to do from the last government. Some of this will be just getting administrative procedures back right. Some of this will be working out what actually happened with some of the decisions were made, and we now know who made that decision. When it comes to politicians owning stuff, probably ideally they wouldn't own anything. They would divest themselves of all shares, of all property, of all income generating interests for the life of their term. Now, I know that we'll get people saying, oh, then who would stand for office? And of course, it would be the people who have none of this, who would maybe make better decisions, more realistic decisions, who would be able to work their way through things like how do we deal with property prices? They've got an interest in it, but they've got no benefit from it. So you can be almost assured they'd be able to tackle these otherwise insurmountable problems. And even the people with the highest integrity will still make decisions based on self-interest, even if it's totally subconscious and they've done everything they can. I suspect maybe it just gets rid of those interests. And I'm not disparaging every politician who owns a house or who owns a rental property or who has a share portfolio. I'm sure that there are some very honest ones who make decisions that go against their interests. But again, if everybody did the right thing, we wouldn't have rules. Maybe we just say if you go into politics, you have no assets outside of the home you live in, the car you drive, but business and agricultural and mining and real estate should be kept right out of ownership of politics. I think it just makes it easier.
But do you think it's fair to say that the government is travelling well within the first 100 days of office because they haven't been in for long enough for things to go seriously wrong?
The one thing, of course, is the tax cuts, which is going to cause them pain the whole way down the track, I think. But that's not a scandal. No one is benefiting from that. No one has had any hearts broken. No jobs have been given out irregularly. That's just a political decision that has the potential to go horribly wrong. Compared to the scandals that the other government had almost from day one with Tony Abbott 9 years ago, this government's run very well indeed.
Oh, well, I think that generally in those 100 days since Labor was elected in May 2022, government generally and politics in general is much quieter. It's similar to what happened after Donald Trump left office in the United States in 2020. After 4 years of political division and mayhem, politics became more quiet in America, and that's generally what's happened here as well. The Morrison government just seemed to be scandal-ridden and lurching from one crisis to another, so it's a welcome relief to at least have a break from that for at least a short period of time. The opposition itself, it hasn't been so quiet, and as we've mentioned in our recent episodes of New Politics, they're seeking their points of difference and division and ramping up problems even when they don't exist. Here's the Deputy Leader of the Liberal Party, Susan Ley. She's having a go at creating a bit of division.
But, I mean, you take the Jobs Summit. The Dealers and Motor Trade Association didn't get an invitation. Tesla did. And there are 20 million cars that run on the internal combustion in Australia today. And these are workers and trades that keep people safe on the roads. And we value what they do out here in regional Australia because we know we're not going to have electric vehicles tomorrow. And no one in the world is making an electric ute, by the way. And even if they were, it would be unaffordable. So you've got this whole sector that is just completely being overlooked. And that's just one group that hasn't been invited to the Job Summit, which indicates that Mr Albanese's priorities are not real and not grounded in what Australian businesses need.
So here she is complaining about people not being invited to the Jobs and Skills Summit. The Liberal Party was actually invited, but they refused to attend. She also made the claim that there are no electric utes made anywhere in the world. She's actually wrong there. There's quite a few being produced. There's Ford, there's General Motors, Tesla, Chevrolet. There's also Rivian, which is in high demand in the United States.
But are there any big companies doing them? That's what I want to know.
Well, that's right. I can't think of any. So we've got a case where Susan Ley has just made an oblivious comment that was factually incorrect, and it's almost like they'll say anything at all. It doesn't matter if it's true or not. This is exactly how they behaved in government. But in opposition, you have to make yourself more relevant, and making things up is not the best way to go about this. They've also reacted quite harshly to the inquiry Albanese has set up to look at the secret ministry positions that Scott Morrison instigated. And yet again, it's another witch hunt. seems like there's quite a few witches out there. I hope they find them all. And of course, this is what they'll say. And of course, there's an element of politics to this inquiry. But essentially, it's to find out how it was possible for a Prime Minister to set up special ministries and arrangements that were kept secret and in cahoots with the Governor-General. And also the inquiry is to investigate how all of this can be avoided in the future. So there's also possible corruption issues involving the Governor-General. So I think that this inquiry, again, it will be an important one, but other people may think that it's not so important. But it's just another one of those issues developed by the former government that we just have to make sure can never happen again.
Governments, I think, have to be very careful in pursuing oppositions. There's a precedent there that leads us down a very slippery slope to where opposition may become like in other countries where opposition leaders are either appointed by the government or arrested. So you do need a very careful and thorough approach. And the type of thing that leaves no doubt that this opposition or this ex-government was extraordinarily out of order. And for most of Australia who watched the Chris Dawson judgment yesterday, which went for 5 hours, that's the level of detail and argument and forensic examination required. Because, again, you don't want to set the precedent of, oh, these guys were duds. Because if you lower the ultimate high standard, suddenly it is, today the government appointed an opposition leader who will sit in there agreeing with the government for the next term till the next election, and the election found that 99% of people voted for the Prime Minister. So while I think that the last government needs to be investigated and go through due process, I think that it needs to be done in such a way that it discourages other oppositions and other governments from acting in that way, and that's really important. But it also is seen as, for these reasons, this was an extraordinary circumstance that required this. Otherwise, you don't want people being arrested just for not being the government.
And it hasn't all been plain sailing for the Labor government. They've got a few problems brewing with stage 3 tax cuts, as you mentioned before, and also the rate of the job seeker payment. And a few weeks ago on New Politics, we outlined why we don't think that Labor will drop the stage 3 tax cuts. Now, we did cop some flack over that, but once again, we don't condone these stage 3 tax cuts. We were just explaining the politics behind it.
Yep.
So we'll say it once again. The stage 3 tax cuts are economically irresponsible and morally repugnant, and they should be repealed. With the rate of job seeker payments, it's currently at $565 per fortnight or $40 per day. And this is what Labor said when they were in opposition.
It should be increased.
Okay.
That's the fact. It's not enough to live on. And the fact is, the first priority should be to get people into a job. Mm-hmm. But people shouldn't be under the circumstance where they can't afford to live. And the government needs to look at this.
Australia is a country that does not have to choose poverty for its most vulnerable people. There is a moral reason to do this. But there's also a really good economic reason to do this. We know that people on low or limited incomes, if they get an extra $10 in their pocket, they will spend it putting food on the table for their kids, buying shoes, paying the rent, making sure the electricity bill's paid. They will reinvest that money in the community, creating jobs for other Australians. We know that confidence in our economy was low before COVID-19 hit. We can supercharge aggregate demand in our economy by making sure the people on the lowest incomes have a bit more in their pocket to spend each week.
And here's Amanda Rishworth, the Minister for Social Services, during the week.
Well, look, we've been really clear about the rate of job seeker. We've been really clear that at the moment, in the October budget, this is not something that we're going to proceed with. Of course, as we've said, we'll assess it budget by budget. And if there is room in the budget, of course, that's how we have to deal with a whole lot of competing measures. So, look, that's the challenge of being given or inheriting $1 trillion worth of debt. But I will continue to work with ACOS and other organisations to really about what those barriers are and what we can do to shift the dial.
that was actually quite painful to listen to. You cannot have a situation where you're so strident about something when you're in opposition and then not do it when you come into government. Labor has argued that it's sticking with the stage 3 tax cuts because that's what it promised to do in the lead up to the last election, but they're using a different argument when it comes to raising the job seeker rate. Business has been calling for a raise in the job seeker rate. Peak bodies have been calling for a raise in the job seeker rate. Many people in the community have also been calling for it. And because the unemployment rate is low, it's actually 3.4% at the moment, there's not as many people on job seeker as there normally would be, so it's not going to cost that much right at this stage. And the people on job seeker, it's mainly a younger demographic and it's mainly the people who vote for the Labor Party. So we've got this peculiar situation, and it's quite outrageous really, that the Labor government is supporting stage 3 tax cuts that will cost it between $20 billion and $30 billion in lost revenue each year, but refuses to fund an increase for job seeker from $40 per day to $65 per day, which will cost it $3 billion per year. Now, I do accept the politics behind Labor's support for the stage 3 tax cuts, but Labor's got this huge gap in credibility if it goes ahead with the stage 3 tax cuts but refuses to raise the job seeker rate.
Yeah, I have thought the politics for saying we're going to break this promise that positively affects so few people. And as I understand it too, a lot of the people who will benefit are actually in favour of delaying it. I've spoken to quite a few people in that tax bracket who've said, look, it's all right for them to delay it. We're not going to starve, and it can come in next term or restructured and done another way. They're not opposed to tax cuts. Not everyone at that level is greedy and grasping and unaware of the broader implications. If I can find people like that, I'm sure Labor could find people who could be quietly dropped into discussions. The thing is, studies have shown that when wealthy people get extra money, they either keep it or they send it overseas. When poorer people get money, they spend it in their local communities. Now, there's a million exceptions, I acknowledge that, but certainly if you look at the tendencies and the percentages, more money going down floats around where it's most needed than money going up. And again, the Rudd payments showed that. Part of the reason we didn't get a GFC is because the poorer people, much to the howling discontent of extremely wealthy people who didn't need it at all, lower income people, then went and spent money in their local communities, usually which floated back up to the billionaires who howled the loudest. So, yeah, again, it's a weird hill to want to die on for Labor. It'd be interesting to see how this pans out.
You're listening to New Politics. You can subscribe to us on Apple or Google Podcasts, listen through Amazon Music, Spotify, YouTube and SoundCloud, or you can find us at newpolitics.com.au. And you can also support New Politics through Patreon.
And the Jobs and Skills Summit has taken place in Canberra, and that was to focus on low unemployment, secure well-paid jobs, expanding employment opportunities, addressing skill shortages, maximising jobs from renewable energy in the digital economy, and addressing equal opportunity and equal pay for women. And there's a wide range of people who attended. There's state premiers, union leaders, banking representatives, small business, big business, academics, economists, church groups, higher education, early education, TAFE, think tanks. So it's a lot of people from the different areas of the community. Peter Dutton decided not to attend, so they gave him a chance to shout from the sidelines, claiming that it was a stunt. There was a union summit, even though unions only made up 28 of the 142 community representatives, and there were actually more people from the business sector than there were from unions. And thankfully, the summit ruled out employing 13-year-olds to fix the skills shortage, so that's at least one good thing to have come out of it.
Do you know how many people I had to send home?
But it wasn't a summit to resolve issues immediately. It was an opportunity to develop a government white paper out of it and create a pathway for employment opportunities in the future. But again, it's one of those government actions that we'll have to wait for a few more years to see if it's a success or not.
I don't know why people like Alan Joyce had to go. Alan Joyce has been a disaster as a CEO. Unless they were bringing him in to say, right, whatever he says, we know to do the opposite. He wasn't the only one, but again, he stands out as someone who is a little bit more inept at his job than perhaps one would like for someone on $20 million a year.
Well, I guess they do have to include the good, the bad and the ugly.
I suppose, yes. I think you're right in that it's more of a preliminary thing to get people starting to think about and to throw in ideas. So sure, should the age for working on weekends and casual work be lowered to 13? Working in a shop on a weekend, couple hours a week, it's currently 14? So to put it down 12 months, sure, let's discuss it. Does that lead to a slippery slope of, we can get minors in at 15 and we can put them under the earn or learn thing and get them out of school, or we can get them doing dangerous factory work at 15. So all of these things, again, have to be balanced. But I will be fair, I think they should be discussed. I still think it's a mistake on Peter Dutton's part not to go because, I know from the very few football games and cricket games I've attended, it was my yelling from the sidelines that changed the outcome of the game. I know that for sure. Again, if you don't want to be a part of it, don't be a part of it, but don't say you don't want to be a part of it and then try and force your way into it after the fact. It's that simple. I think on the whole, it's been a good thing and I hope that good things come out of it. But that remains to be seen.
Oh, well, generally the idea of a summit with representatives from the community, I think that's a very good idea. Members of Parliament are politicians and not necessarily experts in the field. Actually, quite often they're not experts in any sort of field. So it makes sense to seek the solutions to problems from the people that are closest to these problems. And I think that the idea of having government ministers working out the solutions by themselves is probably quite out of date. And sure, they've got their team of advisors who advise on solutions, and then it's up to the minister to try and implement a solution and prosecute the case politically. But I think it's better to get a perspective from a broad range of people in the community, which ends up being a better solution politically as well. Now, if we didn't have a skills shortage, there wouldn't be a need for a jobs and skills summit. And if we had a government over the past 9 years that had prepared for this sort of problem, well, we wouldn't have a skills shortage. And there have been those critics of the jobs and skills summit. You mentioned before, the Liberal Party, Peter Dutton. News Corporation and Sky After Dark, they've been howling at the moon about it. Michaelia Cash has said that some of the proposals from the summit have got sinister overtones and union overreach. And I think that some shadow ministers have been reading a little bit too much fiction recently. And I would have thought that secret ministries and a secret dictatorship might be more sinister than a job summit. But aside from all of that, I think that getting people together to work towards common goals and towards common grounds is better than having them sitting in opposite corners, growling and shouting at each other from a distance, which is what it seems that the Liberal Party and News Corporation wants to continue doing.
They work best, the Liberal Party and News Corp, and that far right at subverting. They don't want to change. The system as it is helps them. The system as it is advantages them, and if you've disrupted the other side, it's actually more influence and more money to these guys. So it's no wonder really that they don't want to go. And there's a sense too in which by not going, they can whinge harder about it. They don't want to be part of the solution. They want to continue the problem. And this is probably why we need to think very hard about media in this country and who runs it, and look at the people who are actually running it and who the media is working for, because it's not their readership.
Oh, for me, it's a little bit like toddlers not wanting to go to daycare, but that's neither here nor there. But Labor does seem to be the party of summits. The Liberal Party generally doesn't do these types of events unless it's a summit to privatise the world or work out ways to destroy unions. Kevin Rudd did have the Australia 2020 summit all the way back in 2008, and many ideas that came out of that summit were implemented in government: the Building the Education Revolution, the National Quality Standard for Early Education Accreditation, the super profits tax, aged care reforms, closing the gap report. Now, a few people have said to me, well, that's not such a great example to use because Kevin Rudd didn't last too long after the Australia 2020 summit and not much of what they implemented remains. But the Jobs Summit from 1983, that resulted in the Accord process, which lasted for most of Labor's stretch in government between 1983 and 1996. So it will take a while to work out the results from this Jobs and Skills Summit, and it might be a case where absolutely nothing comes out of the summit. The government white paper, the results from this might be too late or out of date by the time it is released, and a 2-day summit isn't actually very long, and all it might have done is give people a soapbox to air their grievances, but it's all out there on the public record, and at least it ends up being a signpost for what different sectors want to achieve in the future. So we can see that immigration is going to feature strongly over the next year or two. The gig economy and freelancing will have to be tightened up because there's a lot of workers falling through the cracks and being exploited by large tech giants, and there will be training and skills solutions through the university and TAFE sectors and through apprenticeships. And all of these are areas that were neglected by the federal government in the past, especially during the early stages of the pandemic. And many of these issues can't be resolved quickly or as urgently as the economy needs them to be resolved. So it might be a case where the skill shortages are going to remain for some time to come.
It's not an easy fix, and there's going to be some hard decisions made. One of the things is CEOs and vice chancellors and why are they paid so much? What do they do? And it may be that we just don't know and that there is a value in there. But it seems to me from the outside that there's a lot of people getting paid a lot of money for not doing much. And a lot of that could be spread to other people who do more, including, but not limited to, retail workers, healthcare workers, podcast hosts, first responders, all types of people who fulfill an important and vital part of the economy. I can see places where these things could be funded from. If we cut a CEO on, say, $15 million a year, if we cut the wage to half of that, they're still on an extremely good wage. And there's an extra $7.5 million, which would hire maybe another 100 people. My view is that the economy works best with full employment. Having this keeping wages low and so we'll have a fixed in unemployment is a total waste of effort, of energy, of human resources, and the knock-on effects into the health system, into the welfare system is just unconscionable.
That's it for this episode of New Politics. Thanks for listening in. If you'd like to support our style of journalism and commentary, please make a donation at our website at newpolitics.com.au. We don't beg, plead, beseech or gaslight you about journalism coming to an end. We just keep it very simple. If you like what we do, please send some support our way. It keeps our commitment to independent journalism ticking along. I'm Eddie Djokovic. Thanks for listening in, and it's goodbye to our listeners.
I'm David Lewis. We'll see you next time.